one of the key things I want to hit on that Wade was talking about is that we have a very unique opportunity in California right now. The political stars are fairly lined up for us. We have a governor who, as we would say, gets it in terms of climate and the economy. We have a Senate pro tem who has a strong history of passing energy efficiency measures and strong global warming measures. And we have a new speaker who is invested and who really stands on supporting strong environmental legislation. So this is the time, and as this is the time, we're going to count on our next speaker to be one of the people who figures out the ways to bring the political puzzles together to make sure that we can get as much done in the next 4 years as we possibly can. And it's been a real honor and privilege for me for the past 18 months to be able to work with Vien, because I found that no one is as smart in both the policy and the politics and the ability to bring people together and pass strong environmental legislation that not only helps to solve climate, but it helps to protect the people on the low-income folks in California and the people that have been the most disadvantaged by air pollution and by other pollutants. So let me bring out the Environmental Equity Director of the Greenlining Institute, Vien Truong.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's so good to be here. And before I start, I want to thank a few people who have just made magic happen to pull this together. Theo Grossman, is he in here? Senator Tom Hayden, a California leader and living legend and someone who I continue to look up to. And finally, I want to thank Dan Jacobson, who is just the most generous and kind person I know. What Dan said is right. We have a moment in time, 4 years, where the stars are finally aligning. And what are we going to do with those 4 years? There's a lot of things that we need to have happen, and we don't want to lose this one opportunity. So I want to start by saying, this is where I'm from. This is my home, Oakland, California. Anybody else calls this home? Yay, Oakland is in the house. We know then that Oakland is home to one of the worst pollution in the country. We have the Port of Oakland. We have trucks delivering cheap goods from the port to the rest of the country. This is the 4th largest port in the state, not even just California. We have 1 out of 4 people in East and West Oakland with asthma. Not only that, we have a 10% unemployment rate, double that for men of color. On top of that, 6 months ago, my husband and I were holding our twin 1.5-year-old boys, rocking them to sleep. And outside our window, our neighbor's 16-year-old kid lay dying. He had been shot multiple times. The paramedics were trying to save him. And it stopped me cold. I'm shaking now just thinking about it. The memories of the first time I saw a murder came flooding back. I was 8. The memories of my friends in junior high school murdered came flooding back. My nephew being murdered when I was in law school. And the thing is that a lot of times we think environmentalism doesn't talk about that stuff, that those are separate issues. Particulate matters and 16-year-old kids getting murdered, that those are separate issues. But for me, they're not. For me, it's a question of what kind of world are we leaving to our kids? And for me, poverty and pollution is deeply connected. And it's not just for me. These leaders have been talking about the connection between the planet and the people for a long time. Van has talked about creating green jobs, not jails, an inclusive economy strong enough to lift people out of poverty. Manuel Pastor has talked about the need for us to close this climate gap because low-income communities are disproportionately impacted by climate change. Majora Carter has talked about creating green the ghettos, creating an inclusive community for all people. John Powell has talked about creating a beloved community so that we are not governed by our divisive issues, but really creating a same place called home. So why haven't we created this shared movement, this massive movement that has potential? I think it's because we have to rethink our strategy. We have to ask who, how, and what. Who are we working for? Who's really impacted by these issues? Who do we need to have at the table? How do we work with them? How do we create real, deep partnerships across our issues? And what are we fighting for? What are we dedicating our lives for? What are the core issues that brings us all to the table? When I think about who, I think about this framing of solidarity. If you came here to help me, you're wasting your time. And if you came for help, I don't have the time. But if you came here because you see your liberation bound up in mine, then let's work together. And that's what we have to do. A lot of times our environmental campaigns are focused on traditional environmental groups, and yes, that is important. We need to have people who are fighting for the environment at the table. We now also have to realize that 60% of California are people of color. 73% of people under 18 years old now are people of color. We have to recognize this, and we have to organize around it if we're going to win. So the question is, how are we working with the people who are most impacted? By asking this question, the Greenlining Institute has formed a deep coalition of America's most diverse and oldest coalition, including Asian, African American, and Latino communities. Beyond the ethnic diversity, our coalition represents ethnic chambers, churches, health advocates, traditional civil rights organizations, ethnic media outlets, and community development corporations. We're connecting with others based on what Manuel says, not on our transactions and quid pro quo, but on having a shared vision for the world. And together, I want to make sure that I capture this. Together, we're working on things like electrifying the trucks and buses that come out of West Oakland with EJ advocates. We have worked with ethnic businesses to fight for supplier diversity in banks and at the California Public Utilities Commission. And we have fought alongside consumer advocates to stop rate hikes against working families. And it's important because sometimes solidarity means I'm fighting for the issues that are really key to you, even if they're not on my work plate, because we share the same vision for the world and we fight for the same people. So the second question is, how do we work together in a truly collaborative way? Too often, we're calling on our partners at the last minute and saying, can you bring out 50 or 200 people to this demonstration tomorrow? Can you sign on to this letter of support? Can you endorse our campaign and strategy that we have created 10 months ago? And yeah, we want to make sure that we're engaging and inviting as many people as possible. But what's more powerful is if we're inviting people at the beginning of the idea, at the beginning of the strategy. That's how we make sure we're creating a comprehensive enough idea. An example of how this was done really well is Charge Ahead. When this idea first came together, funders, including Energy Foundation, 11th Hour, and Hewlett, worked together with Dan Jacobson and NRDC to say, how do we make sure that this isn't just about electric cars? How do we make sure that this is about fighting for people all over California? And they invited me to join. They invited some of our EJ partners at CBE to join, Communities for a Better Environment to join. And as a coalition, we asked this one question. How do we make sure that we are not just fighting for electric cars, but fighting for transportation choices for everybody? And this is what we created. Yeah, we created electric cars. We accelerated the market. We also made sure that we're combining voucher programs together and allowing that combined voucher to be used for used vehicle. That'll bring down the cost of an electric car from 2012 to $3,000, a Ford electric car, to $3,000. These are cars that goes on 1 mile per gallon equivalent price. We're also making sure that California's Cash for Clunkers program you can use the vouchers to support public transportation and car sharing, because it's not just about getting a lot more cars on the road, right? We're environmentalists after all. And we're making sure that we're creating 2 pilot programs across California for low-income households, and hopefully 1 for Central Valley for migrant farm workers. We're working on that today, actually. And finally, we're working on financing mechanisms for people with a low or no credit score, and making sure that we're accelerating the programs to have multifamily charging infrastructure. Can I just stop there for a second? There's a lot of people who worked on Charge Ahead. Can you guys raise your hands if you have worked on the campaign, signed a bill, helped support it, called folks, wrote a story about it? This is the group to hang out with here. Thank you. The final question that we ask is what? What are the solutions that we're working for? The old school way of looking at environmentalism is PPMs, GHGs, RPS, mitigation and adaptation. And yeah, those things are really important. I work on those. But we have to think larger and bigger if we're going to solve climate change. These are the issues that Senator Tom Hayden talked about, that Wade has talked about, that Dan has talked about, and I'm going to go into a little bit deeper here. When we talk about the question of climate change and poverty and pollution, we're talking about how the size of this requires a corollary solution. 535 is based on this program. California already has a cap and trade program which makes polluters pay. A group of us, scrappy folks, came together and said, how do we make sure that we're using this pot of money not only to solve pollution but also poverty? So we passed a law, took us 4 years, that requires a quarter of that money to go into benefiting disadvantaged communities. Thank you. And we said, all right, we've been working in the community, we're from the community, but we should not be deciding what happens for the community. So we did a year of meetings, town halls, workshops, webinars, online surveys. We talked to organizers, businesses, council members, mayors. We talked to everybody. And we said, what are the priorities in your town? What are the programs that are the most effective that you see? And they told us these things. We fought and advocated for these in the last 2 years. And we got transit intercity rail capital programs, low carbon transit operations, affordable housing by transit hubs, low carbon transportation. So those 2 pilot programs I talked about, that electrifying trucks and buses, we got funded for $100 million this year. Low income energy efficiency and low income renewable energy. And then sustainable forests, so that the picture of West Oakland that you see next time will have a lot more trees. And that's what a win looks like. $272 million this year for low-income communities to green up. This is the biggest pot ever for low-income communities. Thank you. And it's projected to grow to $3 to $11 billion in the next 6 years. Think about that. That is how we stop homicide. That is how we create jobs in our community. That is how we reduce pollution. That is how we create triple bottom line benefits. And my simple ask to you is that you think about those 3 little questions anytime you start a campaign. Who, how, what? Who are we serving? Who's impacted by these issues? Who needs to be at the table? How are we working with them in a really deep and meaningful way as true partners? And how do we make sure that what we're working on has the most important impacts? What is it that we are fighting for? I'm really excited and proud of just the coalition and the partnership and my team for having delivered some amazing things. And it really does give me hope, despite all the stuff that's happening outside my window. And I also realize that despite all that, no amount of policy is going to stop the murders on my streets if we don't get one thing straight. We need to really create peace in ourselves, peace with each other, if we're going to have peace on the streets. And This is why I do what I do. My kids. And isn't that what we all do, why we do what we do? Our kids, and the kids that we don't even know, our friends' kids, and future generations. When I think about my work, I think about a quote from Tom Steyer, and he and I don't have very much in common. I grew up in Oakland. I grew up in poverty. I still live in Oakland. He grew up in Upper East Side, other side of the country, and is a billionaire. But we do have at least one goal in common. He said in an interview, "My kids are not inheriting my wealth. They're inheriting the world and the values that I'm leaving behind. What I'm passing on to my kids aren't going to be billions. It's going to be clean air." Thank you.